It is my honor to be chosen to introduce our keynote speaker. He is a man who has come to lead our city from the hallowed halls of academia. In reflecting on this, it has struck me that Naheed Nenshi has brought to the mayor's office the wisdom and guidance of a professor. Like the teacher he is a leader who allows the truth to emerge and welcomes citizens to reshape and participate in the truth together. It is most important to have a true teacher speak out in times of confusion and change. As an example, it is said that Aristotle, who was well known among medieval Muslim and Christian intellectuals and revered as the first teacher, he is someone who has influenced civilization to this very day. Ladies and gentlemen, there's consensus among Canadians that our Mayor Nenshi, is the man for the job in these turbulent times. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce a man who not only leads, but teaches. Please welcome His Worship, Mayor Naheed Nenshi.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, and thank you all for being here today. It's always great to spend some time with you early in the year, every year, and talk a little bit about where we are at as a city, and a little bit about Rotary, and a little bit about where we are going together. But it is my great pleasure to be with the Rotarians, mostly because of the sing song, I'll be honest. I was actually quite horrified when Ron told me there would be no sing song today. I'm glad we changed that. Thank you, Bill Avery. I'm going to talk a little bit about my recent travels, but I'll tell you that my most recent trip was to Hamilton. And it was great that you mentioned Bill's Hyman, because of course I'm very good friends with Bill's granddaughter Wendy, who has of course long been involved with the Grandstand Show and the Grandstand Committee at the Calgary Stampede. Why do I mention all of this? I mention it all because of course it was my great pleasure to meet and congratulate a wonderful Calgarian, one of Bill's Young Canadian alumni, on winning 3 Junos this weekend. Kaisa, wonderful work on her part, and she is awesome. But she tells me you kicked her out of the Young Canadians because she wasn't a very good dancer. She's a very good dancer. I really do enjoy, though, spending time with you all, because I enjoy spending time with people who are really focused on service. In a lot of my conversations, I spend a lot of time talking, as Bill alluded to, about 3 things for Calgary. Our movement to encourage every Calgarian to do 3 things for their community every year. And of course, I don't need to do that with Rotarians because it's only March and every single one of you in the room has already done 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 things for the community this year. I do like to remind you, though, as I do every year, about the top secret 4th thing. And the top secret 4th thing is simply not to be shy about your service. Rotarians are not known for being shy. But to talk about your service, to talk about it loudly and proudly, to talk about the change that you're making, and more important, to talk about the joy that your service brings you, and to mentor others into bringing more of themselves into work in our community, into buying on to that wonderful, wonderful motto of service above self, reinforcing for all of us, the role we have to play as citizens. Those of us who have the chance to actually be public servants as a career need also remember that wonderful motto of Rotary every day. And of course, there are many, many things I could talk about. The Rotary Mattamy Greenway, the Rotary Flames gift to the community, including Rotary Flames House, Rotary Challenger Park that you heard about earlier, which is such a magnificent part of our city. But I want to highlight one thing today, which is I was very happy to learn that the Rotary Club of Calgary is a partner of one of my favorite nonprofits in the community, the Centre for Affordable Water and Sanitation Technology, COST. When talking about what the city does, and talking about how fortunate we are, sometimes I stop to think about the fact that we have something like 300,000 or 400,000 buildings in this city. And in every single one of those buildings, there is a small miracle. A miracle that 1 billion people in the world do not live with. And that miracle is a tap. A tap that you can turn on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and out of that tap comes clean, fresh, healthful water. 1 billion people in the world don't have that. And COST is a remarkable Calgary organization working hard to change that. As of last year, they've helped give 9.3 million people around the world access to better water and sanitation. It's an astounding accomplishment, an accomplishment every one of us in Calgary should be proud of, and it has happened in part because of the support of Rotarians. So congratulations on doing that, and on bringing hope and clean water to people around the world. So in my job, it may surprise you to know, I don't actually travel very much. When I do travel, I do like to load up my trips and talk to lots of people and tell the story about Calgary. And last week I got the chance to do that in Halifax prior to coming to Hamilton for the Junos, and you are of course all invited to the Junos here in Calgary. Next year, 2016, will be a year of music in Calgary, including the Junos and the opening finally of the brand new amazing National Music Center and all kinds of music in between those two events. So we'll all listen to music in our hearts next year. And today, by the way, wish me luck, I am off to Saskatoon. Is it wrong that I made a mistake in the slides I'm going to be using for my Saskatoon speech, and the first slide is a picture of me holding the Grey Cup? Just an error, really. Didn't mean to put that in there. In addition to telling the story of Calgary, I've actually been speaking a fair bit, because all of the mayors in Canada, all the big city mayors in Canada have been traveling and speaking a fair bit about the role of cities in our nation. And we've been talking a bit about politics. And I realized, in fact, that as much as I speak in the community here, I don't often talk about politics. And I think that today I might change that a little bit and talk to you about politics in three different ways. I'm going to talk about municipal politics from a public servant's perspective, but also to talk about municipal politics through the lens of local government, of federal government, and of provincial government. Starting right here, one of the really remarkable things that I've noted about my work in my job, I've been your mayor now for 4.5 years, which terrifies me to think how quickly the time is going. But one of the things I've been very excited about is to see how many Calgarians and how many more Calgarians are deeply engaged in their communities and deeply engaged in local politics, far more so than we used to. And it's not just the space of the hyper-engaged. It's not just the space of Rotarians. It's a space that more and more Calgarians of all demographics are entering and engaging because these things really, really matter. And I'm very excited to see that. We had 24,000 people work with us on our budget last year. We have people coming out on single issues in neighborhoods and in their communities, and lots and lots and lots, oh my goodness, lots and lots and lots of general thoughts on what is happening at City Hall. And I think that's very important, because the work that we do really makes a difference. I don't need to sell any of you on that. You've heard me talk about this before. But the work that cities do every single day, every single minute of every single day, is work that is really important to us being able to live our lives. We've talked about clean water, safe transportation, effective emergency response, excellent parks and recreation and cultural opportunities. I often say that the things that the city does are the things that keep us happy, healthy, and safe every day, and keep us smiling every single day. Every week, I get to spend a half an hour speaking with the kids at City Hall School. City Hall School is in and of itself a remarkable little program where children spend an entire week at City Hall. They take all of their courses through the lens of municipal government, and they spend a half an hour with me, which Mayor Bromkani told me before I became mayor that it would be the highlight of my week, and I was very skeptical. But that was because what could be more fun than doing media scrums, for example? It is, in fact, the highlight of my week, and not only because it's where I get the thoughtful, smart, and interested questions. That was just for people in that. But just last week, I had a group of grade 2, no, let's say 2-year-olds, that's not right, grade 2 students from St. Dominic's School, an arts-focused school, asking me all sorts of questions about art in the community, what the role of art was, and how we did it. And by the way, they asked me the 2 hardest questions I've ever gotten. And those were, actually 4 hardest questions I've ever gotten. One was, what is the biggest building in Calgary? And I, of course, answered the Bow because it's the tallest building. I don't actually know if it's the largest by square footage. And the other question was, what's the smallest building? Couldn't answer that one either. The other two questions, by the way, are who was the youngest artist in the public art collection and who was the oldest artist in the public art collection, which I think is very I told them about a young artist and an old artist, but I don't mind getting questions that I don't know the answers to. I'm happy to try and answer those. I will tell you though, very briefly, and I don't want to dwell on it, that one question that seems to obsess a very small number of people in the community is City Council getting on okay? Do you all get along? The answer is yes, by the way, but I don't think it's a particularly interesting question. I think the more interesting question is, are you getting things done together? Are you actually making stuff work? And I think it's fair to say that we really are. When your budget passes 14-1, something that would have been unthinkable under previous regimes, you're starting to see that you're achieving a broad community consensus on what the community needs to do. I want to talk very, very, very briefly about some of the major things that we have worked on together, despite coming from very different political backgrounds and different places where we sit. We've adopted the poverty reduction strategy, the economic development strategy, and the arts development strategy. Enough for all, living a creative life. These are really important because they set the roadmap for who we are as a community and where we are going together, and how those three strategies interact with one another and think about our community development as a whole is very, very, very important. And all three reflect a very broad public consensus of who we are as a community. If I'm not mistaken, all three, in fact, were adopted by Council unanimously. We also had very, very broad agreement, which I'm pleased, very pleased about, because it's one of my big issues, to move forward on the most significant public transit investments in a generation, starting with 7 new bus rapid transit corridors in different parts of the city, and of course moving towards building the Green Line LRT and eventually rail transportation to the airport. You may have seen yesterday that the province has tabled some amendments to the Municipal Government Act. And one of those amendments requires municipalities to establish a code of conduct and an enforcement process for council members. And this is something I've been talking about since I became mayor, and I'm very, very pleased that we've had super broad agreements on how to improve accountability, transparency, ethical standards, and respectful work-based expectations of City Council. And I was also very, very pleased that Council has endorsed the idea to bring in an independent integrity commissioner to make sure that we stay on the straight and narrow. Now, all of this conversation, very transparent, very open, very public, maybe one of the reasons people keep asking the question, is Council getting on okay? Because in the past, we wouldn't have had these open conversations with the public, but I think that's a good thing. And I'm very, very pleased that on the broad scope of what we are trying to do together as a council, we're able to move forward and do this. And of course, Calgarians continue to tell us that they are extraordinarily proud of their city and happy with their city government. I won't give you all the stats, which I usually do when I'm spending time with you early in the year, but our annual citizen satisfaction survey continues to show numbers that are unseen anywhere else. People are proud to live here, they're proud of their community, they're proud to be Calgarian, they're happy with the delivery of city services, they're even happy with the property taxes that they pay. The lowest in Canada, I might add. So generally, all is well. Maybe that's why we're all focused on little questions of, is the mayor a nice person or not? Because generally things are going super well. I like to believe the mayor's a nice person. But while we're talking about things that are going super well, let's talk about the provincial government for a moment, shall we? I suspect we may have a provincial election soon. I know that is a bold prediction. There is, after all a law that says we're not having provincial elections until 2016, and politicians would never, ever violate an election timing law. We know that. But I'm going to make a bold prediction, and the bold prediction is that we will have a provincial election sometime soon. We will certainly have a provincial budget in the next week or so. And actually, I think it's the 26th, so it's almost 10 days away. And you're going to hear me return to perhaps the well-beaten but very, very true refrain of the need for stable, predictable, long-term funding for the infrastructure needs of a growing city. That's actually infrastructure that was needed yesterday, not infrastructure that is needed for tomorrow. I'm not going to dwell on that a lot today. I'm going to talk just a little bit about it and just say that we were very, very, very pleased last week or the week before now when the province announced that they will be putting some more money into this program called MSI, Municipal Sustainability Infrastructure. They found some money from last year's surplus and they're putting it in the hopes of helping to accelerate some of the infrastructure spending that we're doing on stuff that people need. It's not clear whether this is new money. We won't know until the budget. In fact, I suspect it's not new money. It's just an acceleration of old money. But nonetheless, it is very, very, very needed and very well received, and we're very happy to have it. Because as the economy begins to slow down, and like many of you in the room, I am obsessed with the economic indicators that we are looking at. We're seeing how employment and unemployment figures go. Calgary actually created 2,000 jobs in the last month while the rest of Alberta was shedding jobs. These are things that we have to look at very, very, very carefully and keep an eye on. But one of the things that we do know is that interest rates are at historic lows, that we're just starting, don't get excited yet, but we're just starting to see decreases in construction and materials costs. And we're starting to see real job shedding in the construction industry. So to slow down on infrastructure spending at this time would be a terrible mistake. This is exactly the time you want to build. This is exactly the time you want to be building the infrastructure, because guess what? We're going to need wastewater pipes anyway. It's not that saying we're not building them now means we're never going to build them. We're going to need them anyway. So build them while it's cheap. And we as citizens need to give government, the provincial government, permission to do that. To say we're not going to pillar you for spending on capital at this time when you don't have a lot of money in the bank, because we understand that interest rates are so low and the cost of construction is going down. And I think the provincial government needs the support of us as citizens to be able to say this makes sense. Did I say I wasn't going to talk much about infrastructure? I want to talk about one piece of infrastructure needs that is very much on my mind, and that is continuing to build a flood-resistant Calgary. It's important for us to have this conversation again. Last year at this time I spoke with you and I talked about the political will to make sure that we were investing in flood mitigation. But if I recall correctly, I also had a bit of a warning saying that we need to make sure that that political will doesn't waver. And we politicians need you as citizens to strengthen our spines and to ensure that this doesn't waver. Since the terrible floods of 2013, the city has worked on many, innumerably many projects on flood recovery, repair, and resiliency within the city boundary. But we have to continue to have a very serious discussion about upstream mitigation. Those big projects, dams and diversion tunnels, are very expensive. They're outside of our borders. They need the province to act. And they're needed by everyone in southern Alberta and downstream of us, not just by Calgarians. My city colleagues have been working very, very well and very, very closely with their provincial counterparts. I'm very pleased about that. But we need to develop a plan that protects Calgarians and in particular protects downtown Calgary. I'm very happy that the collaboration is ongoing. I'm looking forward to a conversation soon with the Premier about next steps and how we're going to work together. My understanding is that the full plan is not yet finalized. And until that happens, our experts and their experts and all the experts together are going to continue to work together on these things. But I do want to today highlight a few concerns that we have in the City of Calgary that we need to ensure are met in any long-term plan. The province is doing, as you know, a cost-benefit analysis of flood mitigation efforts, and that's very important work. But we have to make sure, and this is, Bill said I was a professor, well, this is kind of what I taught, so I'm going to make sure to say that we have to make sure that those cost-benefit analyses are holistic in nature and really looking at the potential costs in a very broad way. We can't just measure direct economic damage. We have to consider the social and environmental costs of not doing enough. How much does it cost and how much should it cost to keep people safe? How do we protect what is precious to us? How do we ensure that people's lives are not pegged to the price of a barrel of WTI? These are things that we need to really focus on in a very big way. We need to focus on the human cost. of seeing your entire life, your scrapbooks, your kids' report cards, the couch that you scrimped and saved for because you saw it in a catalog and you wanted that couch, out on the lawn waiting for my colleagues who drive the garbage trucks to haul it away. And most important, we have to think hard about the economic impact on our nation. As you know, this hotel was closed after the flood for a few days. Much of downtown was a no-go zone for a few days. Imagine what happens if we lose downtown Calgary for 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months. The economic impact on our city, and indeed on our province and in our country, will be incalculable. And we have to make sure that we're investing now to ensure that that doesn't happen. Because remember too that there are long-term impacts. If you happen to be in a company that has to close down for 2 weeks or 2 months as the result of a flood impacting your offices in downtown Calgary, what's the likelihood you'll want to rebuild in downtown Calgary? We have to remember that jobs are borderless, that economic investment can go to different places. And it's very, very important for us to continue to invest to ensure that we are saving what we need to save here in the country. The city's experts have consistently held the view that we need more than the Springbank Reservoir and the Ghost River Dam operations with TransAlta in order to protect Calgarians. We are very happy that the province has announced that they're moving forward on the Springbank Reservoir project, but it's not perfect, and it's not enough. So we need to continue to work together to ensure that Calgarians and Southern Albertans are protected. The province's own research shows that the next 1 in 100-year flood on the Bow River, and remember 1 in 100 doesn't mean what it used to mean, will cost Southern Alberta over $1 billion. That's just on the Bow. And so we need to continue to think hard about what we're doing. Any one of those major companies, energy companies, does not have to be here. If the risk is too high, it will not in fact be here. So we have to work hard on flood mitigation. To be just a little bit specific, on Springbank, we are pleased with Springbank. Springbank makes sense the way it goes. We do need a comprehensive water management system that protects us not just during flood years, but also during drought years. And the original plans for Springbank that were to create a permanent reservoir, we continue to believe are better than the current dry dam, which would only work during the flood. Plans, because we think that water storage is also important, and we'll be encouraging the province to continue thinking about that. We're very pleased that the province is working with TransAlta Utilities on mitigation along the Bow River. But I will also add, as Don Farrell, the CEO of TransAlta, has told me many times, they have a thimble and they're dealing with a teapot. So we need to think hard about continued mitigation infrastructure along the Bow, upstream of Calgary, or along the Calgary River banks. We're excited about this conversation. We're going to continue to have this conversation with the province. We are very keen to have this conversation with the province. But again, we need citizens to stand up and continue to tell their representatives, municipal and provincial, and ask if we're still willing to make the hard political choices to protect people, protect property, to correct critical infrastructure, and to correct Calgary's financial security from future flooding. And I hope that every one of you, in case there happens to be an election, as candidates come to your door and knock, will ask them these questions. What are you doing on flood mitigation? 2013 feels like it was a long, long time ago, but it was not. And we have to be focused entirely on the future as well as on the past. I want to speak just a little bit now about the federal government. I'm very much thinking about the municipal federal agenda because apparently I'm making another bold prediction. There's going to be a federal election too. Gee, that one the law says there's going to be one in October. So this is, of course, something that is very much at the top of mind of all of us, and Canada's cities are really speaking with one voice on this. We need to do focus on Canada's future. We need to focus on cities. As you know, 80% of Canadians live in cities. Our country is founded on national stories and national myths of field and stream, farm and sea, but we are in fact one of the most urbanized countries in the world. Cities account for 80% of our population and 72% of our GDP. I was sitting around the table recently with mayors of the biggest cities in Canada, and I realized, I did some math on the back of my napkin, I really did. And I realized that the mayors around that table represent about 2/3 of Canada's population, biggest cities only. And we have less than half of the seats in the House of Commons. Which I think is a striking way of talking about how our federal government is sometimes challenged in reflecting the reality of the world that we actually live in the country we actually live in. And it's time for a real recognition from all federal political parties that cities are the drivers of the jobs in the economy. We're not passengers, we're the drivers. A stronger economy means a better quality of life for all Canadians, and this federal election is the time to have that. So to be blunt, if a federal political party does not have a plan for cities, that party does not have a plan for the economy. And it's important for us to remind and to vote based on the interests that we have as city dwellers, as people who live in cities. It's not about what I want. It's not about what John Tory wants or Gregory Robertson wants. It's about what Canadians need. It's about what countries need. And it's time for the federal government to stop with ad hoc, episodic thinking about cities and focus hard on proven job creators like transit, housing, and infrastructure. We are offering our hands as partners with solutions to help solve these challenges. But there are two critical questions that every single politician who wants to serve you in Parliament in Ottawa must be able to answer. Number one, how are you going to reduce commute times for Canadians? Every minute spent stuck in congestion is a minute stolen from the economy, stolen from people's families, and stolen from their lives. In the Greater Toronto Area alone, congestion costs the economy $11 billion a year. Not to mention missed soccer games, missed time with family, missed time to contribute to community. $11 billion a year is the entire turnover of Canadian Tire, and it's lost in one city to congestion. Number one, how are you going to reduce congestion? Number two, how are we going to ensure that every single Canadian has the ability to have a safe and decent place to live? The federal government needs to come to the table on housing in a way that we haven't seen in a long time and talk about how we have a responsibility to ensure that people have a decent place to live. I'm very proud of the success of our cities. As you know, the Economist Intelligence Unit has many times ranked the top livable cities in Canada. And 3 of the 5 top livable cities in Canada are Canadian cities. In the world, excuse me. 3 of the top most livable cities in the world are Canadian cities. That's a big deal. Calgary's number 5, we should be number 4. We gotta get ahead of Toronto. Working on it. But the fact that 3 of the 5 are Canadian cities says a lot about what we've been able to build, despite some of the challenges in funding and financing in other places that we face. We can't go on treating Canada's cities like afterthoughts in federal policy and federal budgets. Because although we're driving the economy, there's grit. There's grit in our gears, and it's getting worse. So, I'm not asking, by the way, here for a handout. As you've heard me say before, taxpayers in Calgary spend about $1.6 billion a year in property taxes to help fund a $3 billion city budget. 1.6 billion in property taxes, 3 billion city budget. We give $11 billion every year more to the federal government than we get back in all federal government programs. And I'm not suggesting that we don't want to be part of the country, that we don't want to continue to support the rest of the nation. Of course we are. Of course we're supporting smaller centers that can't afford water treatment plants. Of course we're supporting healthcare for every Canadian. But we also want to make sure that we get a little bit of a tax rebate so that we can invest in the infrastructure that keeps those taxpayers, individuals and companies here in Calgary. And this is incredibly important stuff. I've talked a lot about transit and transportation. I just want to remind you that gridlock is really the issue here. And we know what the solution to that problem is. The solution is significant investments in public transit across this country. Canada remains the only industrialized nation that does not have a national public transit strategy, and it's time for one. By the way, I will also point out that there's a political imperative to getting this right. When you look at the recent Toronto election, you will have seen that there wasn't any debate about the need to invest more in public transit. The mayoral candidates all had huge multi-billion-dollar plans to invest in transit, and 100% of Torontonians said we have to invest in transit. The question is how? And that was the whole function of that debate. In Vancouver right now, there's going to be a plebiscite on whether they want to increase their sales tax to pay for transit. I don't know if that plebiscite will pass or fail, but I can tell you that what's the interesting thing about it is the no side on the plebiscite is not saying we don't need more transit. They're saying this is not the right funding mechanism. And I think those are very healthy conversations and very good discussions for us to be able to have. Very briefly on housing, protecting and increasing the supply of housing in our biggest cities is a top threat to the economy. Businesses are finding it harder to attract and retain talent. Startups can't make it through their first lean years if entrepreneurs can't find a place to live. We can't attract and hire employees if there's nowhere for them to live. And analysts from the Bank of Canada call the price of housing plus household debt the biggest domestic threat to the Canadian economy. Increasing supply to bring down price is economics 101, but there is a lot of work we have to do. So yeah, I'm calling on the federal government, on all parties in the federal government, to raise their game, to come to cities as partners, to work with us, and to make our success a national priority. And as I said, politically, this matters. I'm telling you now that whoever figures out public transit, whoever figures out how to cut people's commutes, particularly in this city and in places like Vancouver and Toronto, well, that person gets to be the Prime Minister. And it's important for us as citizens of these communities to continue to remind our politicians of that. So let me wrap up because I do want to have some time for dialogue, but I do want to say a couple of quick things. One, we're getting lots done at the City of Calgary. We've got a very solid 4-year budget and business plan. We're building better communities. We're growing in more sustainable ways. We're making decisions about the future of our city to make sure that we are resilient, that we weather whatever comes at us from the price of oil to future floods. But we can't do it alone. We need the provincial governments and the federal governments to come with us because frankly, they've got all our money. But what they also have is mandate from citizens. And so it's important for us, again, as citizens to do this. And these debates get heated sometimes. They're political. We talk about stuff people are passionate about, that they have very different points of view on, and sometimes we fight about it, and sometimes people get their feelings hurt. That's okay. Because we should have passionate discussions about the future, the reason that we do this. And the reason that we do this comes back to 3 words you all know very well. Service above self. Because whether Rotarians or politicians, we're all citizens. And every one of us, as part of our lives, does public service and we make our communities better. So my homework for you today is as we near the next provincial election, keep the pressure on our potential representatives. When you talk to a provincial candidate, talk to them about their plan to protect us from the next flood. When you talk to a federal candidate, ask them for their plans about cutting our commute times and ensuring that everyone has a decent place to live. I don't care who wins. That may sound like a strange thing for me to say. There's a reason I wear purple. Not today. Socks. Because I think that we've got outstanding people running from across the political spectrum who are passionate and have great ideas and want to put those ideas to work in our community. But I care a lot about Calgary. That's my horse in the race, and I know everyone else does here too. And let's make sure that our elected representatives hear that as well. As I wrap up, I just want to give you one little story. I always have stories, you know that. But this one is not a story about me or about anybody that I met. I just want to think about what we've done in this province in the last couple of weeks on the idea of keeping all students safe in school, to make sure that every single student has the ability to stay safe. I gave a speech last fall in which I expressed my dismay, my very serious dismay, with the fact that we had taken gay kids and kids who support gay kids and turned them into a political pinball. I expressed my dismay with the fact that we have a group of children for whom the rates of attempted suicide are extraordinarily high. And we have a group of children for whom we know there's an intervention that works, which is giving them a safe and supportive space in their school. And yet we were fighting about it. So I was incredibly happy when we saw that our provincial legislature together, almost unanimously, elected to make sure that every single school in this province is safe for every single kid in this province. But I was most ecstatic because that had nothing to do with politicians. It had everything to do with citizens getting out there and making their voice heard. When the province refused to have hearings, citizen groups called hearings, and it had everything to do with the parents and those brave, brave, brave students who faced down their government, who said, this is something that's important to us, this is what we believe, and who won. And that tells us an enormous amount about the power of citizenship. I always say that every single one of us has, in our hands, in our hearts, in our minds, and in our souls, the power to make extraordinary change in the community. And the Mike Morrisons and the Richard Iversons and all the teenagers who came out to those hearings are the ones who showed us that true citizenship means standing up, speaking out what's for right, and guess what? In the end, every now and then, you'll win. And I hope that every single one of us will be inspired by that, will be inspired to take into our own hearts and hands and minds and souls the ability to make our community better. And when I come here next year, I look forward to hearing all the stories of how every one of you has done just that. Thank you all.